welcome back to another live broadcast for the Private Practice Growth Club. And we have another guest expert on today. Her name is Ilana Steyn, and she is from Company Partners. Now, Company Partners is a company that specializes in company registrations and also in compliance. I know that when I sent out the How to Start Your Private Practice checklist, and if you haven't downloaded that yet, you can go to www.privatepracticegrowthclub.co.za/checklist to download that. I had a few people respond or email me saying that, they don't really know where to start. They don't know how to actually register their practices. And I thought, why not go to somebody who is an expert and does this all day, every day, and can give us more accurate answers than what I can give you. So thank you very much to Ilana. I'm going to bring her on screen now. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm going to do it a little bit of fun for today. So I've actually brought my books for you guys. So as you can see, this is what we're going to do today. I have compiled that in 400 pages. So I hope you guys are ready. No. Please, no. Get a cup of coffee, get a pen and paper. Please enjoy the afternoon with us. Kind of the format that I had in mind for us for today is to maybe run through a few slides. I've prepared that, but I want to really ask you guys to feel welcome to also ask questions, or maybe keep that to the end and then we can run through that, because it's a little bit of a compliance thing and it's the rules and regulations. I just wanted to give you something that you can actually take with you. So those of you that love reading, I have actually included some of the sections in the different acts. So if you want to do some light reading tonight, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And then also I've gone through to some governing bodies. So I actually spoke to Tasneem about this as well. And I said to her, it was quite an interesting ride, because I contacted these guys and I have all my sympathy for you, because it is as if from one person to the other, and they didn't quite know how to answer me. So let's see what today has in store. And if there's any additional questions, let's tackle them as well. Great. So I absolutely love this section that you guys had on this part as well. Thinking about starting, just started, or establishing a growing business. And I think this is exactly what we are talking about. So she's given me a little bit of an insight of who you guys are, and I did a bit of research just to see who are the governing bodies involved with these organizations. And I would love for you to maybe just share with me who else is involved with governing your specific industry. So these are some of the ones that I could pick up. Tasneem, I don't know if you maybe want to add to them. Have I left anybody out there?
Yes, well, I think that there's also biokinetics. And then I think also there is a distinction, although with the Private Practice Growth Club, health professionals can also include nursing and social work, but they do fall under a different body to the Health Professions Council of South Africa. And then previously, back in the years when I was still a university student, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, and the like used to be called allied health professions. And so those who are in my age bracket and older still kind of default to calling ourselves allied health professions, much to the irritation of the newer therapists, because we actually did fight for a long time to be recognized as health professionals, not allied health professionals. And as a result, there is actually a distinction in that allied health professionals and the allied health profession has its own body called the Allied Health Professions Council of South Africa. And they would include like homeopaths and chiropractors and all those kind of health professions that do not fall under the medical act. And so there's that as well. And then, so like I said, the nurses would have to adhere to the Nursing Council standards, and social workers have their own social work body as well. Yeah, and there's quite a few others, but I think you've kind of got the most common ones that are in our group. And then, of course, we have dentists who also fall under Health Professions Council of South Africa. But as a dental profession, they also have some kind of, separate rules when it comes to marketing and stuff. But as far as registration of the practices and that, it's still the same as with the rest of us.
Okay, perfect. I think you're giving me a little bit more homework for the next one. But I mean, this is what the sessions are about. So let's see what the feedback is that they've given through to us. So just to give you an idea of what today is about, so I'm going to talk to you about a little bit on companies, what is required, what type of companies you get, and then specifically also the governing bodies requirements for how do you register, what do you need to include in your name, things like that. So I will also share with you guys anytime after the meeting today. So, firstly, we look at the Health Professional Act, and I'm not going to read everything. This is for you for light reading at a later stage. But there is an act, and I think that at the end is what we are looking for: is there a governing body, and what is the requirement? So they say that they therefore entitle practitioners to practice in an incorporated company. So there they've got the ethic rules of conduct, and then also saying that it's got to do with a juristic person by the practitioners of the same profession or the same scope. So I've actually received quite a nice bulletin that I can also share with you guys that will give you a little bit more information on this. So just to touch on the types of companies, so as you know, you get a private company that's called a PTY Limited, which is the general type of company that's registered in South Africa. So that's usually used for general trading, those type of things. So then you also get a non-profit company that's called an NPC. That's usually for community outreaches, churches, or for a good cause. And then we get the incorporated companies or the personal liability companies that they then usually use for the professionals, the attorneys, the doctors, and the engineers. So this is where it's getting interesting, especially with your governing bodies, just to say what are their requirements. So when we look at the naming of the practice, they also had quite a bit of rules in terms of this. And once again, I've got a nice document that I can send through to you guys afterwards if you want to look at it. But it usually includes the practitioner's name or her name in as part of the name of the organization or in the partnership that they're going to form. And then once again is if they are working under the name of somebody that um, has left the organization or the practice, they have to make sure that they've got the consent of that person to still use it as part of their practice. So that was quite interesting when I read up about that. And then also not using expressions like hospital, clinic, or institute. So these are some of the guidelines that they have given through for the registration or the naming of the practices. So then, very interesting, I made contact with Desmond and he gave me through this as an example of how you can actually name your practice. So he said that when you are registering a personal liability company, they need to follow Rule 5 of the ethical rules dealing with naming the practice. And he gave a few examples there. So it could be the name and surname, the surname and name, the abbreviation or the initial and the surname, but not psychiatrist or psychotherapy. So that was quite interesting as well. And then you mentioned earlier, Tasneem, about the nursing and dental technicians. So they also have governing acts that you can read up on how to register. But most of them would either be a partnership or then registered as an incorporated company, depending on the requirements of those specific acts or a governing body. So I have reached out to a few people there. I have not received all the answers. So hopefully by the next one we get together and COVID is not such an issue with everybody working from home. It will definitely help us to have some more clarity on these specific industries as well.
Ilana, can I just come in there? So the whole issue of naming a practice is quite a big thing at the moment because what has happened when I first qualified, it was a known thing that you only name your practice by your name. And I think that because that was the time before there was Facebook or social media and digital marketing. And I think with the implementation of digital marketing and wanting to market your practice and compete for the digital space, the newer therapists, kind of started using these fancy names, and it started to become adopted because it's not really regulated. And so it's become now of recent times kind of a little bit of a thorn in people's side, an issue, because there are so many practices that are incorrectly named. Now there are some ways around it, which I won't go into now. But what I'm quite surprised about, which I didn't know, was the whole thing about the designation of physiotherapy or physiotherapist. I know, but with that, are you referring specifically to the what you register your practice in SIPS, like as your incorporated name? So could you still use the designation to refer to the type of practice you have, but your actual business registration name shouldn't have the designation? Can you just clarify that?
Exactly. So it's very similar to what we call trading as. Those guys, or those of you that knew about the older Companies Act, is that you could actually trade as something else. So, say for instance, you would be Tasneem's Therapy or Tasneem's Incorporated. So, say for instance, you used your surname and there was another company registered with exactly that name, they will not allow you to register a similar name. So what then happened is they would register a company under a different name, trading as. So I think what is happening in the industry, because I mean, like with SIPSI, um, there's so many company registrations that has come through, or so many people that's got the same surname, that if it's only going to be the surname incorporated, you're really going to get stuck somewhere. And I think
Hmm.
that's why probably allowing you guys to have a incorporated name and then maybe use your full name and surname, incorporated being the abbreviation at the end, but then trading as whatever therapy it might be, and they will allow that to go through. But the registered name still needs to adhere to the requirements. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I just want to
Perfect.
also say, if I see people are starting to come watch live, if anyone has any questions around that, please just drop it in the comments. And depending on whether it's appropriate to interrupt Ilana, or if we would leave it till the end, but we will get to your questions. So please just drop your questions in the comments.
Perfect. No problem at all. So a personal liability is still seen as a profit company. So it meets all the criteria of a private company, and there you've got the specific act that also regulates that as part of the Companies Act at CIPC. Then the name ends on the abbreviation Inc. or Incorporated. And then a personal liabilities company memorandum of incorporation must specifically state that it is a personal liability company. And I'll show you a little later in the slides exactly where that would come in so that you can identify your company as being an incorporated company or a personal liability company. So, what specifically comes in is this sentence that I've highlighted here for you guys. It says, a personal liability company, the directors and the past directors are jointly and severably liable, which basically means that whatever is going to happen in that company for the time that you are the director, any decisions that's being made together with the company, you can be held liable for that. And that is the whole purpose of having an incorporated company. So, as I mentioned to you guys, I went to the professional governing bodies and Desmond said strictly incorporated. So, believe you me, I've asked this in different ways and in different statements to make sure that if we guide you guys, what should it be? And he said strictly incorporated. So what this basically means is that if you are incorporated company, because the directors and the company are both jointly liable for anything, that means that they are both responsible for any debts or liabilities in the company. So the director of the company can't walk away and say, sorry, this is not me, you need to sue the company. So what happens is that past directors can also be held liable for anything that happened in the company while they were in office. So for the period that they were appointed as directors, if something went wrong during that session, they could still be held liable. And that's something that you need to understand when registering an incorporated company. Then once again, just the creditors that can also hold the directors responsible for anything. And I think later on, I'm touching on that as well, is to actually read the contracts that you guys sign. So even though you think, oh, I'm signing this in the company's name, they can't do anything to me, it's slightly different when it's an incorporated company. So the other thing that's also important is the shareholders of a company. So what happened previously is we had a different Companies Act, and under that act, they actually stipulated that the directors and the shareholders of the company must be the same people, thereby limiting the people that's involved in the company. But under the new Companies Act, that has changed, and I found this interesting article on that as well, where they indicated that the directors had the choice if they wanted to be shareholders in the company or not. So remember, under the new Companies Act that came into effect, the directors of the company are held liable for whatever decisions are being made. So what happened in the past is that a lot of times people will register companies, say for instance PTY Limited, and they will say, okay, fine, these people are the directors, they run the company, these guys are the shareholders, they own the company. So then the shareholders will give the instructions to the directors, they will follow that through. Something bad happens, and the director stands back and says, I'm sorry, it's not my fault, I acted on behalf of the shareholders. Now, the shareholders might be overseas or somewhere else, and now who do they need to keep responsible for? So with the new Companies Act, they've changed that, and they say the directors are also able to be held liable. So it actually becomes very similar to what happens in a personal liability company. So you need to know that you can be held liable for the decisions that you are making within that company. So also when we look at the registration of a personal liability company, is that you need to have at least one director upon this registration. And unfortunately, for those of you that have family trust or maybe want to have another trust as the shareholder, that will not be possible. So also what is required on personal liability companies is financial statements. So as you can see here, you need to prepare annual financial statements. And once again, that depends on the type of company and the turnover. We call it a public interest score that will then determine if you need to be audited or if you can be independently reviewed. So that's something that's also stipulated according to the guidelines from SARS and also the Companies Act. What is also very important is that you guys realize that personal liability is available to shareholders. So any person that wants to know information on the company can actually ask that from a shareholder's perspective as well. And then the company is a separate legal person and can buy property and assets in its own name. So this is probably the question between, do I trade as a sole proprietor, or do I have a company and I can buy property in that? Tasneem, anything that you maybe want to ask at this point, or are we good to follow through?
Yes, I think one of the questions is a big one, which is, well, so if it sounds like with the incorporated, with you still being responsible for all the decisions made,
Yes.
And having a company comes with additional costs to maintain that company registration, then what then would be the advantage of having an incorporated practice rather than a sole proprietor? And I don't know if that's a question you want to leave for later or if that's something you want to address now.
I'm quite comfortable giving that answer now. Thank you so much. So this comes up on a regular basis. When do I stay a sole proprietor and when do I become a registered company? So what I usually suggest to the guys is look at where you want to grow the entity. So say for instance, it's only going to be you and your people. The next 5 years, it's only going to be you, and whatever you're going to do within the organization, it's just it's just you being involved. Then it's fine. Then you stay the sole proprietor because the liabilities between the incorporated entity and being a sole proprietor is basically the same. But if you have growth in mind and if you want to maybe register entities or buy a property or get assets in the organizations, it might be a different scenario because remember, if you're going to have it in your personal capacity and you now start a business and you want to get new shareholders and new directors into that business that's going to share in that property, you might then have to transfer that property from your personal capacity to the company. So it's really to do with how do you structure your company. And there I would actually maybe advise you guys to also get an accountant or attorney involved just to give you that clarity on what is the tax implications that we need to look for, and what is the benefit in terms of assets in a personal liability company, because at the end it's all about the growth of the company going forward. And so what would usually happen on a company is say for instance you've got this registered practice, you two shareholders and two directors on this entity. Now you want to bring a third one in or sell the practice as a whole. Then what will happen is you will basically transfer whatever's in the property over to that person or to that entity that's going to take that over. So immediately it's seen as a separate legal entity and it's quite an easy process. But if it's in your personal capacity and you kind of want to do those growth steps, then you need to split it because now you're probably working from your house, you've got certain expenses. So having that formal registration or entity in place kind of helps you set up, especially for future growth. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And I think also I would add to that, aside from growth, everything has an end point. So, and they always say there's that saying that says start with the end in mind. So it might sound strange, but if you haven't even started your practice yet, why would you think about when you're going to stop working in your practice? But I think that is a consideration for whether you're going to stay a sole prop or a company, is that in a sole prop, as I understand you saying, is that you are your practice and you can't sell yourself. So if you are planning to, when you eventually stop practicing in your practice, to sell your practice, it becomes an impossible task as a sole prop, as a health professional specifically, because you are your practice. It becomes really difficult and tricky because, like you say, all the assets and everything is entangled in your personal name, compared to with a company. The company and you are two separate entities, so you can kind of divorce from your company, so to speak, and then pass it off. Whereas if you are planning to stop practicing and just kind of sell your assets, like your property and that, for yourself, and then just close it off and end of story, I'm happy, then it's perfectly fine to stay as a sole prop.
Yeah, and you can imagine, say for instance, you're setting up your practice and you're looking at things like property, rental agreements, getting a cell phone account, anything like that. Now you're renting a printer. Now you're doing this. Now you're doing all of that in your personal capacity. Now, by the time that you think you need to sell it, you need to re-sign and reapply for all of that. Whereas if you've got a registered business, the business stays the same and it basically just continues on with a new director taking over some of that. And it's also like what I explain to clients when they come to me and I say, listen here, if you're gonna sell herbs from your garden or from your home, that's fine. Try it out, see if it works. Sole proprietor is fine for that. But as soon as you would like to deal with somebody that looks at you in a professional capacity, if you have to make the choice between a person being a sole proprietor and a person that's registered as a company, and you are looking for professional services, which one are you going to work with? So I'm not
Yeah.
saying the one is better than the other. I'm saying that is the principle of people out there that's going onto Google or going onto search engines and say, this person is a registered entity. No, this person is dealing in their personal capacity,
Yeah.
and it makes a difference for some people.
It's about perception at the end of the day, which is all you really have. And then I also wanted to, then the question that leads off that, of course, is like you said, it's perfectly fine to start out as a sole prop because it's easier and simpler. But if you do start seeing the growth come in and you now want to transition into a company, how difficult is that? And again, I don't know if that's something you want to answer now, or if that's part of your presentation, of if how do you then change from being a sole proprietor to an Inc., or if you have incorrectly registered your practice as a PTY. So that whole headache of changing your registration.
Perfect. That's what we're going to do in the next slide. So we on the
Okay,
next slide.
great.
Let's introduction to companies. So the companies are all governed by the Companies Act of 2008, and most of the companies can be registered with or without a name. So we usually say rather register it with a name from the start, because that kind of saves you the headache of somebody else using your name, and you know what you're going to be registered. If, however, like Tasneem has asked, if you registered incorrectly, you can quite easily change that and apply for a name change. And the form that I've indicated there is called the COR 15.2 form. That is a special resolution. So what will happen is you will first apply for the name, get the name, and then we're going to submit the documents to change the name for you. Um, then I've also indicated there for you the two different formats of companies. So what will happen is if you by accident went onto CIPC yourself, registered the company and didn't know about all the red tape and the regulations, it might be that you registered a short format MOI or company, which is called a COR 15.1A. So that is like the very standard documents that's provided by CIPC, just to say, here's your company registered, here's 4 pages that indicates what your company's rules and regulations are. Then you get a longer format company that is called a COR 15.1B that we usually use for the incorporated companies or for the companies that got a lot of rules and regulations in terms of shareholding and directorship and different rights and things like that. So there you can stipulate specific requirements for it. So firstly, what we're going to look at is name reservation. So you asked me earlier about that. So reserving a name is not mandatory for your company, but once again, you guys being in a specific field and have regulatory bodies, you would have to register that incorporated name for you. The name reservation is valid for 2 months, and when you apply for it, you can put 1 to 4 names in order of preference. So, say for instance, you're going to put Naidu Incorporated, the chances might be good that there's already that registered. But if you're going to put N Naidu Incorporated or Natasha Naidu Incorporated, the chances would be better for that to actually go through. Unfortunately, CIPC does not allow any symbols at this stage yet. And then there's a very interesting thing that you can also do. So, say for instance, you decide to set up a practice, but you're not quite ready to register the company yet. You can actually do a defensive name reservation. So, what this means is that you apply to get the name reserved, and that specific process that we then do allows you to have that name registered for a 2 year period in which you are safe that nobody else can then use that. What will then happen is in that 2 years, you can establish your business, you can decide how you want to register it and when you want to register it, and then you just use that approved name to get the registration through. If after 2 years you come and you say, I'm not ready yet, you can actually re-reserve that name on a yearly basis. Once again, you have to weigh up the the purpose and the long term what you would like to do with the company. And then, as I indicated there, there's a small fee of 50 Rand that is then deducted from your agent code when you are with CIPC, or if you work through a company like us, we will then basically include that cost with the application for you. So some of the problem words that we picked up as well, especially when you do normal name reservations, was using the word company or bank or holdings or group or anything like that. So once again, as you can see there, we've also indicated Inc. So when you do the application of the name, you don't include the word Inc. because that is the abbreviation of the type of entity. So you're just going to say Natasha Naidu. And when you do the registration of the company, upon the registration, they will then add the Inc. for you. So as you can see, I've asked little Tabu there to be with us today. He's like our little go-to person that gives us some hints and tips. So under the Old Companies Act, you could actually register translated or shortened forms of the names. Unfortunately, under the New Companies Act, you can no longer do that, and that's why they've become so strict on the names as well. Tasneem, do you want to ask anything?
Yes, I wanted to ask, so what happens if your name is taken? So my name, Tasneem Abrams, is a very common name, for example. And if I wanted to register Tasneem Abrams, I'm sure that it would be taken.
Okay.
So what if T. Abrams, Tasneem Abrams, and Abrams is all taken? What do I do then, especially considering that I'm so limited when it comes to the Health Professions Council?
Absolutely. So this is something we get on a regular basis because clients come in with this idea and they absolutely feel like nobody's got that idea. They've got this most unique name. They went onto Google, they couldn't find anything similar, and then they get stuck. So that's why exactly we've got the 1 to 4 options of names. In your case, what I would do in something like that is I will put in all 4 name options. So I would be T. Abrams, Tasneem Abrams, um, Abrams itself, and leave it like that. And then when you get your name application back and none of them has been approved, then you take the document to the regulatory body. You show to them these are the names that you submitted. It's all been rejected by CIPC. What would be your next step? Because they at the end would be the people that can tell you, okay, fine, Tasneem, we understand your predicament. Maybe add whatever it might be, but they will have to give you that authorization in order to use that.
Okay.
Yeah, what we would usually do in a normal PTY limited situation is we will maybe add a suburb that the person is working in, or Cape, or um, Western Cape, or something like that, that makes it a little bit unique. But I think in your case, being incorporated companies and they don't really want to see anything else, they will have to give that permission. So I would almost go and say, here's my application. It's all been rejected. Here's a few other name options that I thought of maybe trying. Would you allow me to do this?
Hmm.
Try that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Great. All right. So just looking at private companies, all companies have to have an MOI. So that is your memorandum of incorporation, your rules and your regulations of the company. And that will also be set out by the shareholders. So that's why the shareholders in the company is also so important because they decide what is happening with the organization. So as I mentioned to you before, you get a standard MOI. This is something that the CIPC would provide to you. Very standard document, 4 pages, and they give the rules and the regulations. But if you want something specific in your incorporated company, you will have to use that 15.1B specifically because then you can say, okay, I'm only going to appoint directors that's got this specific qualifications, or I'm only going to appoint directors that has a 5 years experience. And you can then indicate on your MOI what the additional requirements might be. So then I've done a short description for you guys of what is included in the MOI. Once again, I don't want to waste your time through this, so I'm just going to do the headings of it. But basically, article number 1 would be about the incorporation of the company and the nature of the company. So that will tell you, is it an incorporated company? Is it a PTY limited? And how is it being set up? The second section would usually go around the securities of the company, that's called the shares in the companies, and what the beneficial interests are. So if you maybe have different shareholders in the sense that you want different classes of shares, you would actually indicate that as well. Then the third section would go about the shareholders' right. What can and can't they do? The authority to act on behalf of the business. If they're not available for meetings, what would happen there? Can they nominate somebody else to be representing them in certain things? And then also certain rights that's allocated to shareholders when shareholders meetings need to take place, and then certain resolutions that take place that we call ordinary or special resolutions. So just touching on that, I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. An ordinary resolution would be something like, I'm changing the address and we're now moving from this house to that house, and we decide to change the address with CIPC. That's an ordinary resolution. A special resolution would be something that will maybe change the right of the shareholders, change the name of the company or the type of industry that they are in. Tasneem?
Yeah, I wanted to just ask, so does that mean, of course, if I go and register Tasneem Abrams Incorporated, and then I'm the only one in my company, so then I would be 100% shareholder and the director, right? So do I still need to have like all this information about meeting dates? I mean, I always joke that as a business owner, you should still have meetings with yourself. But is that something you're supposed to be including like in your memorandum?
Yes, it's a standard form of the memorandum because at any stage you will bring somebody on board. So that's why I say
Okay.
the standard MOI would probably be okay for a person that's just registering by themselves. Once again, your situation is different because they're now asking you to register an incorporated company. But I just wanted to highlight to you the different compositions of what the MOI stands for and what is included, just so that you know, because I think a lot of people register a company, never read the MOI, and don't even know what is that.
Yeah.
Right. So the last little section is about the directors and the office bearers. So directors are the people that do the day-to-day running of the company, and you also have to then say what is the authority of the board of directors, when do they have to have meetings, and what is the compensation. So I think that as a business owner is always important. You need to pay your own salary as well. But looking at a bigger organization, is you might have some rules and regulations to say how does the increases work, when will we increase, and that's where it becomes really important to have a comprehensive MOI set up. So the section that I've indicated here in red would then fall as an addendum to your MOI. And this is how you're going to see if you are an incorporated company. So it will then specifically say Schedule 1 incorporation and nature of the company. And then it will stipulate the directors and the past directors are jointly and severally liable together with the company for any debts and liabilities of the company as are and were contracted during their respective periods in office. And this is what's making an incorporated company to have um, that paragraph in there. So, as I mentioned to you before, what is also important is to have shareholding and share certificates. So, your share certificates will then indicate who the shareholders of the company is. And once again, on an incorporated company, you can then decide what the percentages would be. So, say for instance, it's only yourself now. Now you want to bring in a junior partner, you bring them on as a director of the company. You've got your MOI stipulating what the rules and the regulations are for the directors. But you can say, listen here, I'm going to start you off with 1% shareholding in the company. And I'm going to keep 99% because you first need to show yourself. And then get to some other agreement to say, listen here, as you grow and as we grow the business or we reach certain targets, then I will either transfer some of my shareholding to you, or we will just within the company issue more shares or a lot more shares so that that will bring in more revenue to the company. So that would probably be one of the things that you need. Once again, Tasneem, I think you're going to ask me if you're the sole. director on the company, do you need a share certificate? Yes, you do.
Yes, and I also wanted to ask, so I think this is a part that is really confusing for us health professionals, this whole thing about being a director and a shareholder, and especially because I think a lot of health professionals in private practice kind of live from hand to mouth in their practices, especially when they're just starting. So the whole concept of thinking of themselves as a director, you think of a corporate with lots of profit and things like that. So can you also just explain a little bit in terms of like what are the obligations of the Inc. with regards to remuneration of directors, and like with the shareholders, there's the dividends, and that's something separate. So is that something that needs to be laid out in the memorandum as well, or is that something that can be discussed?
Absolutely. So this is exactly what you want to stipulate. So being the sole director and shareholder in the company, I can totally understand you say, oh, well, I'm going to do whatever I want to do when I want to do it because it's my company. But as soon as you become more than one person, it's obviously going to have some rules and regulations because you might be this person feels that, say, for instance, you got a 50,000 Rand fee in for a fabulous job that you've done. And now he feels like, oh, we need to splurge a bit and we're going to buy a new car for the company. Well, I don't know how you're going to buy a car on 50,000, but in any case, and now the money goes into that. Now there's no rules that's saying he can't do that. So that's why you want to protect yourself and say, let's set up an agreement, let's set up that MOI to say, how do we how do we decide things? Maybe what you can do is what we usually suggest in businesses is to say, give a limit to the directors to say, you've got a spending budget up to 5,000 Rand. If you want to go above 5,000 Rand, you need to have the approval of two or three directors or shareholders. That's just a way that you can protect yourself, and you can actually stipulate that in your MOI.
Yeah, I think I can attest to that because I'm one of the directors, one of three directors of a non-profit company. So it's not a public benefit organization; it's a non-profit company, Josie for Autism, and we have it in our memorandum that any funds that we want to spend, because even if it's not for our company, it's for charitable causes or anything we want to spend, we need to have two out of three of the directors agree. So if one is not available, we need to have, otherwise we can't move forward with something. But we do also have it that it can be an informal discussion. So we usually make decisions over WhatsApp, and that's perfectly fine. Unless, of course, there are like bigger numbers, then we have to bring in like interested parties and all of those kind of things. So that's, I'm assuming that's kind of what you're talking about, the same thing.
Exactly, absolutely, and maybe just to add to that, I had a situation where I had four directors coming to me, and they said, but they wanted to register a CC, so that was in the olden days, and they said they each going to put in 50,000 Rand on the entity to get it up and running. It wasn't 2 months later, two of the members wanted to pull out of the entity. Now you must remember, if you had a budget of 200,000 Rand and you said, okay, fine, I'm going to use every for advertising and marketing and things like that. And now I tell you, okay, sorry, I'm halving that, and you only have 100,000 left. You surely would have looked at your expenses slightly differently. So if they didn't have an agreement in place, what's going to happen to that? And exactly the same as what you said now is that there needs to be certain protections or decisions being made. And a lot of us make decisions on WhatsApp or Skype or anything like that. So, say for instance, you know that somebody's not going to be available on Skype for the next 2 days, and you send out a notification and say, listen here, guys, I'm going to buy, say for instance, this printer. The printer costs 10,000 Rand. Is it okay? Please let me know by tomorrow, 5 o'clock. And by some way, you know that that person's not going to review that before that time. That would mean that you are not acting in best interest. And that's why if you stipulate it in the MOI, you can say, sorry, there needs to be a notice or there needs to be some or other way that that is being communicated properly, not to exclude somebody on purpose.
Okay, yeah.
So just in terms of the other question you had, that say for instance I registered this company wrong. I mean, it happens. What we then do is we convert it from a PTY limited to an incorporated company, and we do that by means of a special resolution. So you're not lost, don't feel lost at all. We can help you do that. So special resolution, we set up the rules and the regulations, and we ask CIPC to change it from a PTY limited to an incorporated company. The only thing that will change, your name will stay the same, would be the abbreviation at the end that says PTY limited will then change to Inc. And if it's in a different year, you might get a new registration number. We don't always know how they allocate that or how they decide it, but we've seen the trend that the latest years that they just give a new registration number for the entity. The nice thing about this is whatever contracts or whatever you set up before in the PTY limited stays in the incorporated. So you don't have to redo everything. You can maybe just take the documents to the bank and just tell them you're not a PTY limited anymore, you're now an incorporated company.
Okay, great. Because I think that was a concern where a lot of people didn't know they weren't supposed to register as a PTY limited, and they did. And obviously, there's that stress of now, well, we have to change everything. So you're saying basically you don't have to change much. It's just that the number will change. But this is, of course, very different to if you want to change from a sole prop to an incorporated. Am I understanding correctly that you would have to then change your bank account as well and a whole bunch of other things?
So what happens with the sole prop? The sole prop doesn't have rules and regulations or official document that say that you are registered as a sole prop. It's just basically trading as yourself. So there's no document or anything that you can convert a sole prop to a company. So basically, what will happen is that if you are currently registered or trading as a sole prop in your personal capacity, all you need to do is just go to CIPC or come to us and say, I want to register my company. It needs to be an incorporated company, and we start the process for you. So there's no major changes in terms of that. However, with the bank account, what will happen is that some of the banks might say, it's fine, you can use that, just bring us the company documents and you can continue with that bank account. Or they will say, we will now have to switch you from one type to another type. So that it will really depend on the banks.
Okay, great. And then let's say you have somebody who, they were all gung ho and they registered their business before even really starting anything, and then realized, hang on, they jumped the gun and their practice isn't really going to grow that much, or they don't really have the bandwidth to grow their practice. They'd like to rather go and be a sole prop and then first build from there. What is the process if you then want to close down your Inc. and then rather practice as a sole proprietor?
Okay, so basically what you will have to do then is what we call deregister the company. That means that you will have to have a tax clearance certificate with SARS to show that your tax is up to date. And then the shareholders and the directors of the company then needs to have a special resolution to say that we are closing down the company. They then have to do a declaration to say that there is no outstanding liabilities or cost or anything like that. Because if they are, and this is kind of your way to sidestep that, you can still be held liable for that. And then it's not a deregistration, but actually a liquidation of the entity. So there are ways of closing it down, but they are quite strict on how you do that. It's not a difficult process, but if there is something not in place, it might hinder you from getting that deregistered.
So would liabilities include what the company owes the owner or director? Because I know, again, with the hand to mouth kind of thing, and I know from my experience when I first started my other business, my digital marketing business, is that you use a lot of your personal funds as you're growing your company. So that becomes money that the company owes back to you, right? So that then a liability. So I mean, if you saying, well, I'm willing to like forfeit that money and just close my business, like how does that work?
Okay, so definitely that's a very good question, and I think we actually need to get a tax person involved with that. My understanding would be is if this is money that's owing to you, and you are willing to kind of say, okay, I need to step away, and I want to let this go, and I'm fine on settling this and just writing it off. I don't think that would be a problem because you just owing yourself. But I think as soon as a third party is involved, they can actually say, sorry, you cannot close down. And that is why, as part of the deregistration process that we follow, that when you apply for it, it takes a little bit of time before it's finally deregistered. Because CIPC then goes, they will then put an ad in the government gazette to say, these are the entities that want to be deregistered. And usually the guys that have big debts and things like that, they've got people that's watching that on a daily basis to see, is there somebody trying to deregister their company to sidestep us? So the same way as that, say for instance, you are owing money to a third party and you can't pay that, and they have asked you and pleaded with you and things like that, they can actually apply for that deregistration process on your behalf because they will have the proof to say you can't pay your debt, you're not even trying to to resolve the matter. So we then apply with the court to get you
Oh,
deregistered.
wow. Okay. So that would be the difference between you self liquidating and somebody else applying, then you become liquidated, then essentially.
Correct. So liquidation basically happens is that it's also a similar process, but what they will do is they will then actually go to the guys that you're owing money to and say, listen here, say for instance, it might be SARS, you've got a debt of X amount, and then they will say, okay, you can't pay that X amount, um, but you can pay 20,000 Rand. Would they accept it? Because there's no other money. I mean, if there's no money, there's no money. But you need to remember, because you are an incorporated company and you are held liable for anything that happens in that company, your own property can come into consideration. So, as much as you might say, I don't have money in my account, because you are now trading as in your personal capacity as well, anything that's an asset of yours can be then taken to resolve that. And that's something that you guys need to understand. If you're a sole prop or an incorporated company, it's that fine print when you sign that lease or that contract.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Maybe a bit more than what you wanted to hear on
But these
registration.
are important things that I think people need to understand because it's these are, regardless of whether you're a sole prop or a company, at the end of the day, there's the specific reason the Health Professions Council is there to protect the public. So unfortunately, we have to then bear the brunt of the risk in opening up practices because that we have to be liable. And unfortunately, so it's important to go into practice, private practice, as a with a business mindset, and to understand that these are the things that you are basically, because you then you need to take the risk with full knowledge and awareness so that you can avoid making mistakes or investing too heavily, or those kind of things. Because I don't think a lot of people realize when they have a company that, if the house, your personal home, is in your name and you get into a situation like this, that they can actually go after your personal assets as well.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting when you approach me. I also went to places like Outsurance and the insurance companies to find out how what what are their requirements to cover you guys from an insurance perspective. So that's something that we can maybe touch on another day because I know we are running out of time. But
Yeah.
interesting, one of the organizations came back and they told me it doesn't matter how you are registered. So you've got something that's called personal insurance or personal liability insurance, and then you've got professional insurance. And not everybody gets the professional insurance, but I think we can one day touch on that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So just maybe wrapping up today's session. So when we look at the custom MOI, it's indicated by the shareholders and their specific conditions. You can say if you want it to be audited or have specific requirements for meetings or different voting rights that you can include in your MOI as well. It can also say if you want a specific legally qualified person to be a part of your board of directors. And once again, it is then lodged manually with CIPC, called the document COR 15.1B. And then what we can do is, like I mentioned to you before, we can convert that short format or that 15.1A to a 15.1B using that COR 15.2. So, yeah, I know these are all abbreviations, but at least you know that these are the documents that we use for that. Then just the last slide that I wanted to share with you guys was basically just to say other information that you guys need to keep in mind when you're working with companies is the issued shares and that you've got share certificates for it. If you are more than one director and there's transactions happening and it's one person resigning and another one being appointed, really looking at this is a picture of an old company register book where you still had to write it on. You also get electronic versions of that because remember, because of the liability of your industry, you need to know on what date this person resigned, on what date was the other person appointed to see who's going to take liability for whatever happened on that. Then remember that you have to be SARS registered. So, luckily for most of you that registered recently would automatically get a tax number, but you still need to go through the registration and the verification process with that. Also, when you registered as a company, you need to submit annual returns with CIPC. That's kind of a yearly fee that you need to do to say that your entity is still active. You need to submit your SARS returns on a yearly basis as well. And you'll probably need a bank account for the company as well. And that's basically it. So I think we've covered quite a bit for this afternoon. But thank you so much. And yeah, open for any questions.
Thank you so much. I think the main one question is, so as much as this was very informative and helpful, if you're the kind of person that wants to kind of just, I don't want to have to deal with this, can I just get somebody to do it for me? Can you just talk about, I'm now, let's say I now decided I'm going to register Tasneem Abrams Incorporated. What is the first thing I need to do, and how would company partners be help in that process?
Okay, so basically, how can we get involved? So,
Mm,
what we do specifically is help and guide people through this process. So, you can pick up the phone, you can phone me directly, or you can phone our toll free number, and then we will have a quick discussion with you just to find out what it is that you want to do, how you want to do it, how many people are involved, and then we will start the process with you and say, okay, fine, let's start with getting your company registered, and then we will take it further. So depending on what it is that you need to do and how many people are involved, we will then guide you through the whole process. So you're more than welcome to just phone the offices.
okay, so that kind of will be also helping with this the memorandum and what documentations need to be sorted, and just telling somebody, you would tell the person, okay, this is what you need to do next, because I think sometimes we just need somebody to say, okay, this is what you need to do next, do that, and then we'll take it from there.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how our system is set up as well, is that you get a dedicated consultant. So at any stage that you feel you want to just quickly ask a question, that's why I also got my WhatsApp number here, is you can send me WhatsApp or you can phone into the office or pop them an email and just ask the question. And the whole idea is to make it as user friendly as possible. So we get the ID number, we get your details from you, and we start the process. We've even gone that far to say with the incorporated companies, we've got a standard memorandum that you can use. So we can register your company for that, that it adheres to all the regulations prescribed by CIPC. And then also, if you maybe have a partnership and you've got more people involved and you want it a little bit more custom made, we also have attorneys that can help with that.
And what is the cost to just register just one person as an incorporated with SIPs?
Great. So I usually get involved with the setup, not the cost. So let me get back to you on that one.
Okay. Okay, no problem. So yeah, and I will say that obviously when I reached out to company partners before I'd met you, I had gone through the process that a customer would normally go through. And I was very impressed because like I sent an email and then I got like this friendly like email to say this is your agent or your person or whatever the person is, and they are going to call you at such and such a time. And then this really friendly guy called me, and then I went into this whole explanation of what I actually wanted. And he patiently waited and listened, and then he said, "Oh, you will get back to me and speak to the right people." So, yeah, it was a really pleasurable experience to kind of like be treated so efficiently. So, yeah, I think people will be pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely. And I think that's the whole thing. We all in business. I've been a startup as well. I work from a home. I understand everything that you've asked now as well. And these are real questions that need to be answered, and you want that person to help you and guide you through the process, because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ilana, for your time. Can you give us a snippet or sneak into what we're going to be discussing next week?
So that is actually up to you guys. I think today for me was absolutely an introduction. Tasneem, you can really get the feedback from the guys to say, listen here, this is what we want you to zone in on. If we have to talk about directorship or shareholding, we can touch on that. If we need to look at liabilities of incorporated companies in terms of contract, I can get Armand in. He's our specialist on things like that. And maybe we can have that open discussion just to say, what do we need to know about doing business as a registered company? And then if you guys can just send me through some of your other governing bodies, I can maybe get hold of them and see the requirements in terms of that, and maybe give you a bit of feedback on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So people can just drop their comments in the Facebook group if that's where you're watching. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can also just drop your questions in the comments as well. And I will pass that on and we can hopefully get your questions answered. Thank you so much for your time.